Channel 58. This is the instructional television station for all of Southern California, KLCS Los Angeles, where we believe television is for learning.
Hello, welcome to Lesson 11. Our lesson today will be identifying and predicting. Remember in Lesson 10 we gave you an introduction to the IPDE process. Now today we're going to examine the first two, the identifying and predicting aspect of the process. Let's review again, what does IPDE stand for? The letter I stands for identifying, or identify. P stands for predict. D stands for decide. And E stands for execute. Howard, let's take a little closer look at it.
Okay, Linda. Perhaps you remember this chart we had from Lesson 10. Let's take a look now at the 4 steps. The identify. Remember, we spoke about actually seeing. Not only seeing with the eyes, but seeing with the brain. This we have referred to in Lesson 10 as the process of seeing. The predicting or predict is the driver capable and able to predict what potential hazards might occur after he has identified them? And has he been able to decide what evasive action he will take in the event that his prediction does become a reality? This we referred to as the thinking process. Then finally, after the driver has identified the potential hazard, predicted what he may do, made a decision based upon the prediction, then he is going to execute. That is, actually move the hands, move the feet, or whatever in order to avoid this potential hazard. We call this the doing process. So again, identify, predict, decide, and execute involves seeing, thinking, and doing. And we should again remember that this process is one of the major things that we must consider in the driving task. So now let's take a look at identifying itself.
Okay, how is identifying defined? Now, in your syllabus, remember it looks like this. In your syllabus, if you take a look at Lesson 11, you will see identifying defined. And it is defined as the process by which drivers become aware of objects that may affect their continued movement. How do you become aware of objects, and what types of objects should you become aware of? Well, let's take a look here. First thing you need to be concerned with are traffic controls. You should be looking for signs, signals, markings. Okay, these will tell you what's happening out on the road ahead. Another thing you need to look for when you are identifying are road features. Is there a curve in the road up ahead? Is there a hill? Does it dead end? Will you have to turn very soon? So you need to look for road features. The third thing you need to really scan the road and search for are motorized vehicles. What about motorcycles, other vehicles, trucks, buses? You need to really keep your eyes open and scan the road ahead and watch for these. And the fourth thing you need to be aware of are non-motorized vehicles or pedestrians. Let's say bicyclists or kids on skateboards, and as well as pedestrians. So in identifying what to look for, you need to especially look for these four things. For traffic control, signs and signals, you need to look for road features, you need to look for motorized vehicles, and non-motorized vehicles. Those are four things in particular that you need to scan the road ahead for and especially watch for. Okay, Howard, where should we look?
Question. This is something that that drivers sometimes really neglect. There are three particular areas that we need to look. First of all, we want to look ahead. We don't want to just stare at a particular point. We want to scan the entire area ahead of us. Another place we want to look is we want to look at our mirrors. Not only our inside mirror, which gives us a view of the rear portion of the vehicle and what is immediately behind us, but also our left-hand outside rear view mirror, which gives us a view of oncoming traffic in the lane next to us. And if we have it, a view, use the outside right-hand rear view mirror, which will give us a view to the right of us, which of course is extremely important. We want to see what vehicles are approaching from behind us and to the right. We recognize the fact, of course, that we do have blind spots and mirrors do help us, but then again, that blind spot is still there. The third point of where to look is at your instrument panel, and in particular at the speedometer. Remember that your speed is important, and we talked about stopping distance. So if you make an adjustment in your speed, you will probably have a good way of avoiding a possible conflict. And these are the three areas that we look at. Ahead, in our mirrors, and then finally, of course, at our instrument panel. Now, how long do we look for, Linda?
Okay, there are a couple of different places where we need to look and how long to look. Let's take a look at a chart. Let's assume that we are the car, okay? And let's assume we have a fixed object up ahead. Now, normally when we are driving, we should be always looking at least 12 seconds ahead of our path. So if we are the vehicle, we should be looking at least 12 seconds ahead of ourselves. Now, how do we know that we're looking 12 seconds? Well, if we look at a fixed object, and then we begin to time ourselves, 1001, 1002, and you end up going through 12, 1003, 1004, all the way up to 12. You should not reach that object before you get to 12. If you do, then you're not really looking 12 seconds ahead of yourself. Let's say you get to 1008. Well, then you know by the time you've reached the tree that you're only scanning the road 8 seconds ahead of yourself, and you really should be looking at least 12 seconds ahead. We're talking about possibly half a mile ahead of yourself, always looking as far ahead as possible. Now, not only do you want to be concerned with 12 seconds ahead, but you also have to be aware of what's happening closer, and this would be like knowing what's happening 4 seconds ahead of you as well as 12 seconds ahead. So your vision will constantly change. You may be looking 12 seconds ahead, and then you come back to looking 4 seconds ahead. Okay, now Howard's going to tell us about another technique.
Okay, Linda. Oftentimes drivers will stare at an object rather than glancing at the object. And of course, when we talk about staring, we mean concentrating our visual attention without blinking. Let me give you we'll do a little experiment here as to what we mean when we think of staring and glancing. I want you to take a look at this pen, and I want you to take a real good bead on it right at this point here at the center, and I want you to stare at it. Stare very hard at it. Then, I want you to continue to stare and relax your eyes. Have you noticed that perhaps you see a second pen right here? Now, that will be because the eye has a tendency to wander, and it's not that your attention is split, it's just that the eye is wandering, and it's It's an optical illusion. This is often what happens with drivers. So when we're driving, we want to glance. We don't want to stare ahead at the object. We want to focus our attention, but without staring. Now, Linda, you're going to talk to us about predicting, aren't you?
Right. Now, remember the definition of identifying is seeing objects up ahead. Now, what is the definition of predicting? Well, in your syllabus, again, you'll find a definition that it's the ability to foresee things happening before they actually happen. Now, you may think, well, that's not always possible, but this is what predicting is all about. You see something up ahead, then you should be able to predict what is it going to do? What is the kid on the bicycle going to do? What is the animal across the street going to do? So in a way, you almost become a psychologist at this point when you're out on the road. You have to actually predict the actions of people and the actions of animals when you're out there on the road. Howard, you want to tell us a little more about predicting?
Okay, Linda, let's take a look here at the magnetic board, and we can get some ideas as to what you were speaking about. For example, the path. We're just going to make an assumption for right now that we have maybe 2 or 3 children playing in this area, and perhaps there's a dog in this area. And let's say that the dog, for example, is distracted by a cat. Or let's say that the children are playing with the ball and the ball bounces out into the street. Once you have identified the hazard, and have you predicted what will happen? Have you predicted that perhaps the dog would chase this cat? Of course, you're not going to hear the cat, but have you predicted that the dog might dart out into the street? Have you predicted that the ball will come bouncing out into the street? And what we're talking about here is the path that the potential hazard might follow. Secondly, we want to take a look at the action. That is, once the ball comes out into the street, are the children going to be following this particular hazard, or are they going to be following the ball, and therefore they become the potential hazard rather than the ball? Then the action, that is, what particular action are they going to be taking? That is, are they actually coming out into the street? And we might ask ourselves, what action at this point are we going to, or would we predict that we would take? Would we, for example, might we slow down? Or perhaps might we pull over? Also, let's take a look at the threat. Now, the child running out into the street is the actual threat. And then finally, we have the point of conflict. That is, at what point does this threat actually take place? Because the child nears the curb, is that the point of conflict, or is the point of conflict when the child comes out into the street? Okay, Linda, we're going to be talking now about, we've talked about this. Let's now take a look at something that is going to help to really illustrate it.
Okay, we're going to do some commentary driving here. While we're watching, we'll be talking about what we're identifying and what we're predicting. Howard? Let's get started here.
Have you identified the red truck and predicted that perhaps there may be something behind it?
Okay, what path will the truck end up taking? Now we're going down a residential street here. Of course, you should constantly be identifying driveways. Oh, what's that on the right? Do you see the trash can? Right. Whoops, car coming down the road here. And again, we're identifying, constantly moving our eyes back and forth, scanning the scene ahead. Remember, you want to be looking 12 seconds ahead.
Don't want to stare.
Right, we identify the curve in the road up ahead. What do you predict about? What might come around the curve? What might enter your path? Oh, identify the car on the right. You predict it'll move into your path. Oh, there it goes. Remember, we're always predicting the worst possible thing that might happen. That way we'll be ready for it. You see oncoming traffic, of course, more residential area. Think of all the potential hazards, kids, animals, toys, pedestrians, cars backing out. Keep those eyes moving back and forth. Identify the car as stopped.
Predict that the driver will get out.
Yeah, we were slowing for the parked car, and the car behind us passed us right up. It wasn't very safe. Identify the bridge up ahead. You predict, of course, that you never know what might be coming on the other side. You see the people on the bridge. You predict, of course, that one of them might step out in front of you. Remember, we're predicting the worst. What's going to happen on the other side of the bridge? Any prediction?
Identify the intersection, the car turning left. More residential, we've identified more residential areas. Identified another intersection. Keeping our eyes moving, we don't want to stare. We want to keep scanning. Remember that 12 seconds ahead. Stop sign, we've identified the intersection.
Okay, and of course we'll be checking left and right. And as we proceed, of course, keep those eyes moving 12 seconds ahead and then bring your vision back to 4 seconds ahead. Identify a street here with a lot of shadows. Very difficult to drive on.
And predicting that something may be hidden within these shadows.
Right.
Something that's very, very important.
Right. Animals, of course, can hide in the shadows. We identify the curve up ahead and oncoming traffic. Predict, of course, someone may be in the path. Oop, there's a car on our side of the street.
Yeah, have we considered the possibility that maybe there are more obstructions ahead?
Another curve up ahead. The guy on the left is stopped. Car on the right. We predict, of course, they'll come into our path. Curve up ahead. Of course, we predict anything could get into our pathway. Look at the pavement markings. Of course, the people on the other side of the street can pass, whereas we cannot at this point.
Identified the people outside of the car and predicted that one of them may come out into the street. Somebody has a flat tire. This is a very dangerous situation, especially if they're not pulled entirely off the paved edge of the roadway.
And of course, we identify a curve up ahead again. We've got another street up ahead with more shadows, making it again hazardous for driving because we predict anything could come out of the shadows.
Right. We have an animal back there. Somebody could be walking alongside. We wouldn't see them, Linda.
Right.
Identify the intersection.
Intersections, car parked on the right. Of course, you predict it could pull out.
Sure.
Oncoming traffic. Got some motorcycles here. Oops.
Ooh.
Are we ready? What do we predict? Oh!
Did you predict that that third motorcycle would turn in front of you?
Okay, now we have an exciting assignment for you. We're going to show you a part of a film, just like we've just seen, and we will have you do some commentary driving, and we'd like you, even if nobody's around you, try and talk it out, just like we've done. See if you can talk it out, identifying and predicting. Here we go. Go ahead and do some commentary driving. do you think that guy was doing out in the middle of the street there, Howard? What did you predict about him?
Well, I assumed it was a fireman, and there was probably a fire, and that he was redirecting traffic away from the emergency situation.
Okay.
How about the motorcyclist, when we had that first motorcyclist come out? Did you predict that there might possibly be a second one coming out?
Yeah, I did, but that's something, again, we're predicting the worst, right? Could be that nobody was really there. Now, during that sequence, you should have been trying to verbalize your own thoughts of identifying and predicting. Okay, this is what our lesson's been about. And Howard's going to give us a little review here now.
Okay. As Linda said, we have been discussing in this lesson identification, or identify and predict, and we also talked about in the last lesson decide and execute. So let's take a look at identify and predict, which is really the main thrust of the lesson. Now, under identify, we have what to look for. We look for traffic controls, road features, motorized vehicles, and non-motorized vehicles. Now, such things as under non-motorized vehicles as bicyclists, pedestrians. Under motorized vehicles, we might have things other than automobiles. We might have trucks, motorcycles, buses. Traffic control signals could be signs, signals, markings, and road features such as maybe we have a hole in the road, or perhaps the road is graveled at that point. Also, we need to know where to look. We want to look ahead. We want to use our mirrors, of course, inside and outside. And finally, we want to look at our instruments, and primarily our speedometer. Now, how long do we look for? This is another question that arises. Well, we could start out by looking using the 12-second rule, the 4-second rule, or looking 4 seconds ahead, and then finally, we don't want to stare, but rather we want to glance. Now, finally, we want to take a look at the factors of predicting. The first of these factors would be the path. That is, the path of the potential hazard, that the path that this hazard is actually taking. Secondly, we want to look at the action. That is, what action is this potential hazard taking? The third is timing, predicting how long it will take before you reach that particular point. The fourth is threat, predicting the immediacy of the threat. That is it going to be immediate? Is it far off in the distance? And the fifth is point of conflict. That is the point at which the potential hazard will actually be encountered. Now, Linda, you're going to discuss with us our activity?
Right. Our activity for this lesson, for Lesson 11, number one, we want you to continue with your chart that you started working on for Lesson 10, okay, the IPDE chart. You should still be riding with drivers and watching how they use the IPDE process. The second activity for this lesson is we want you to list the 5 factors to consider in predicting, okay, the 5 factors to consider in predicting that Howard just reviewed for us. Okay, that's it for Lesson 11, right. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Share your heart and your home. Be a foster parent. Every year, thousands of children are abused, abandoned, or neglected. They need your help. There is a critical shortage of foster homes, especially for infants and teenagers. Today's child is tomorrow's future. Will you help make that future brighter? To learn more, call the County of Los Angeles Department of Children's Services at 418-203